I want to thank Richard Kirsch, who not only purchased the sermon, but chose a topic that challenged me a lot. When I found out he'd purchased the sermon, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? I have to say, sort of innocently, I hoped it would be something I could, do. So a little warning. This one's a little longer because there's so much to talk about, and I didn't want to leave out anything important. And wouldn't you know it, serendipity happened. As I'm preparing my sermon on March 2nd, the Government of Canada announced that the Health Policy Branch was going about soliciting input from people across the nation to inform the development of a men and boys health strategy. The stated goal is to create supportive and safe environments for all ages to seek help when they need it. And I'm going to give a lot of little figures and data as I'm going along, and most of the information comes from their report, the first report that they put out about what they're doing. And what they have found, and it won't be a surprise to many of you, is that our young men are in crisis. From their teens through their 30s, young men are experiencing higher rates of suicide, depression, anxiety, and mental health concerns. We found in their research that 17% of young men live at home with their parents. They're not seeking relationships or employment or education or anything much beyond their video games. And essentially, they've withdrawn from life. Our young men are reporting declining levels of mental health, increasing rates of mood disorders, depression, and higher anxiety. The rates go even higher for young men who are unemployed, are out of school, or are not engaged in any kind of job training. And they're struggling to find meaning and purpose and direction. Not surprising, with all that going on, young men report that they're using more legal and non-legal substances to deal with life's challenges. And when online gambling became available, the rate of calls to gambling addiction hotlines increased exponentially as young men became involved in sports betting and poker games and casino games. They are racking up unbelievable debt. And it's another form of corporate developed and encouraged addiction. And overall, it's interesting that statistics show that men bear a greater burden than women in relation to their health status, and that their problems start long before they reach adulthood. Men are impacted more often by suicide and premature death, are more prone to abuse substances. They are more prone to be affected by violence, to be incarcerated, to be homeless, and to suffer more chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease. That being said, men, on the other hand, are less likely to contact their physician or anyone and pursue screening or practice preventative care. 65% of men, they say, wait more than 6 days to report and treat their symptoms. The health strategy hopes to improve outreach and education to address men's concern about what they describe as the stigma of asking for help, so that they're more comfortable about seeking care sooner for both their mental and physical well-being. I know that it would be easy to just say, well, that's not really a government problem, is it? I mean, these people make personal choices. They have their own lifestyle. You know, that's the real problem. And I have experienced that our culture has a strong bias for blaming the individual when that person does not or cannot meet societal expectations. So we're encouraged to see all of the challenges as uniquely personal, like you're the only person that ever used, we'll stick cocaine in there, even though we hear it's a huge problem. If it isn't being used by a lot of people, why is it such a big deal? We are encouraged to see challenges as our own personal problem, instead of expecting accountability in the larger society for such things as exposure to harmful chemicals or dangerous work conditions, inequitable employment practice, systemic bias, violence could be in there too, inadequate housing and nutrition, corporate malfeasance. I mean, it's a long list of systemic things that affect all of us. And yet the evidence continues to grow that social, economic, and cultural factors shape health outcomes for both men and for women. And gender and other social determinants impact men's and women's risk and outcome with health challenges. Today I'm focusing on the male part of the equation. Some of the contributing factors for men's challenges in the health field are lower education levels, higher rates of incarceration and homelessness, work exposure to high-risk activities, stigma and peer pressure to be a man, and so forth. Other factors we know influence wellness and health include systemic racism, colonialism, economic inequality and discrimination for men who are Indigenous, Black, or otherwise racially identified, or are part of the LGBTQ2SIA+ community. But let's turn our focus again back to those young men in crisis. We can't minimize the impact of video games, social media, and the vast access to information, porn, podcasts, and websites that can be used to support one's particular bias or encourage one to adopt a story about why life is treating you badly. Housing costs, difficulty getting a job that offers a living wage, the rise in food, rent, and other necessities, and the cost of those, and a world that is now feeling like it's in chaos, the withdrawal from a diverse and engaging social life outside of online activities, feeling a lack of purpose and meaning in one's life, and seeing media role models for young men that equate masculinity with being tough, surrounded by beautiful and compliant women, having vast sums of money for gold jewelry and expensive cars and high-end living and fame. There's a lot of pressure out there. And young men are taking all of that information in, sending it, frankly, through the rather still immature circuits of their minds. We know that men's brains don't mature until a bit later than women's brains. And as they're doing this and putting it through those circuits, they're getting angrier and more resentful, confused about their lives and more hopeless about their future. They worry about things: will I ever get a job? Find a relationship? Am I going to be able to afford a home? Can I ever have a life? And there are a spectrum of responses, from mildly depressed or discouraged to those who bounce into the extremes of suicide, or identifying with incels, the involuntarily celibate, who blame women for their unsatisfactory lives, the many woes of the world, and the lack of opportunity that they feel. Spent a lot of time online looking at stuff for this sermon. And it's true. As a matter of fact, young men frequently blame women for the rising challenges in their own lives. There are so many online forums and podcasters and influencers who encourage this line of thinking, and specifically they point to the rise of feminism, which in their view disrupted the historical balance of power between men and women, and has put women on top. Young men increasingly express their contempt for women. They endorse misogyny and suggest that the world would be made right again if only women could be relegated to traditional roles that are subservient to men. And I'm sure most of the women in this room are saying, oh, hell no. The goal of feminism never was and is not to make women into men or to advantage women at the expense of men. It's to allow women to enjoy full personhood, to be equitable with men, and to address the historical advantage white men have had for centuries. I want you to remember that equity is not pie. If I get a big piece, you don't necessarily get a little piece. We can share. It's okay. Men have had so much power and advantage and control for so many years. Couldn't we just share a little and expect women to be treated like humans? The proposition that this might become a reality has seemingly scared the shit out of a lot of men, and they're online talking about it. As Unitarian Universalists, one of our principles is to create a just and equitable world. So from that point of view, we need to stop throwing women under the bus and blaming them for men's woes and society's ills. After years of the patriarchy, we have an obligation to create equal opportunities for women and men all over the world, not just in Northern Europe or North America. And I'm afraid that the term feminism has become a bit of a sticky surface on which you can just kind of throw all of your resentments, and it's become the focus of men blaming women and keeping them angry, rather than confronting some realities that are bigger than each individual person. It's going to take a lot of conversation, a lot of engagement, a lot of talk, a lot of give and take to confront the norms of the past, identify legislation or cultural and personal changes that will move the needle on equality, and stop reinforcing outdated stereotypes about what it means to be a man or a woman or a person. There are so many factors in our culture that impact the well-being of adults and children. Overwork, emphasizing financial and material gain, focusing on technological devices, apps, and information, school overcrowding and underfunding, addictions, limited resources for mental and physical health care. It's a long list. We could fill up many flip chart pages if we were in a meeting. We are constantly confronted with a multitude of ways to be distracted and diverted and disengaged. Women and men, boys and girls, people across the spectrum of humanity are suffering. And another thing we need to work really hard at is we need to stop pathologizing the behavior and character of men and boys. I hear it every once in a while. Oh, boys. They're so loud. They can't sit still. They like sports and hunting, and they act so immature. I mean, it goes on. And the truth is, yeah, they are loud, and they do like to do things that are physical, and some like sports, and some like hunting, and we all have a moment or two now and then when we act immature. But that's not all that's going on there. Men's traditional roles include providing for the financial and physical needs of the family. That's the provider role. Protecting those who are weaker by providing security and stability, that's the protector. And making babies so that we continue the family and community population, that's the procreator part. Today, these traditional roles are being reconsidered, and we're thinking and leaning into new ways to express these duties in ways that allow both men and women greater flexibility in their lives. In addition to strength and courage and leadership, we're adding more modern concepts to what it means to be a man, having emotional intelligence, expressing one's empathy, sharing the emotional and physical work of being a family. Changing the bonds that subjugated women results in changes to the bonds that have held men captive as well. I started looking around and thinking, well, when did we adopt these stereotypical kinds of roles and expectations for men? And I went back to Shakespeare and Hamlet. In that play, Claudius, who is Hamlet's stepfather, reproaches him for expressing unmanly grief at the death of his father, the king. Claudius suggests he would be better off to forget about it and move on. And I thought, wow, I'm sure it goes back before that, but 500 years of, sort of ingraining in people that you can't have feelings, that's going to have an impact. Our culturally accepted appropriate behavior for men has apparently been around for a long time. No vulnerability, no emotional expression, except anger, no particular empathy or sensitivity, because those things are associated with femininity, and that's not something that you want to be if you're a man. Men are expected to be tough, to avoid being humiliated by being seen as a sissy or doing things that might indicate that one is homosexual. And this has led men to avoid close, tactile, platonic friendships with other men. You watch football games occasionally, or you watch men on the soccer field. Do they ever run up to each other and put their arms around each other? Well, they do, but it's kind of like that, and then they boom, boom. You have to boom, boom on the back. You can't just put your arms around and go, oh, whoa! You have to go, boom, boom. To fear intimacy with other men, and often with women as well, even with those that they say they love, what a burden. Many young men feel a sense of exclusion and isolation and confusion regarding their role in modern society. And while they yearn for respect and emotional safety, meaning and belonging, instead they've become disillusioned and disappointed. The dreams they had are not coming true, and they don't see any way for the dreams to come true, or even some version of the dream they had. And so they make the choice to disengage from the challenge of the chaos and the change around them. To avoid confronting work, education, social expectations, relationships, or exploring what they could do to change their lives for the better. It becomes easier to remain in the basement, engaged in endless rounds of video games, online pleasure-seeking, and insulated from the things that might confuse or frustrate or overwhelm one. When you go searching around on this topic, there are two authors that figure quite prominently in the things that they've said about the lives of young men and how to turn those lives around. One is Scott Galloway. He wrote the book called Notes on Being a Man. He's an entrepreneur, and he's a marketing professor at New York University's Stern School of Business. And the second is a man named Richard Reeves, whose book is titled Of Boys and Men. And he is the president of the American Institute for Boys and Men. He's also an academic and has done other work. And these are the kinds of things that they are suggesting might help our young men. First, he says, we need more men in our school system. Young boys need to see more men teachers. They need to see more men teaching in the early grades especially to help young boys see positive role models of men and socially appropriate male behavior. They suggest that getting men volunteering more in coaching, leading groups for young men in churches and clubs, leading scouting type organizations, being volunteers at Big Brothers, could be amazing ways to have impact and to be a mentor and a model to young men. Young men need adult role models and the guidance and input of elders to move more effectively into their own maturity. Second thing they suggest is that we are more vocal and we advocate more for the support of men and boys' mental health resources, reducing the stigma of seeking help by sharing our own experiences, by pointing out alternative ways for boys to behave outside of stereotypical male behavioral scripts. We all know men who are on a spectrum of different kinds of behaviors and different kinds of realities in their life. But kids don't see that as the role model when they're watching video games, or they're on their screens all the time, or they're listening to podcasters. I'm sure there's really great podcasters for young men. I just didn't hear any of them. We need to work, number 3, we need to work on establishing and supporting male mentoring programs so that young men can benefit from having someone to talk to and ask questions and be guided and encouraged to help them know how to live life in this system. Reward them for expressing feelings, being sensitive, crying, or being vulnerable. So volunteer, if you're a guy, volunteer to be a mentor to a young man. And yeah, sometimes they're kind of surly and sometimes they don't really want to get involved. I don't really need an old man to talk to, and they do. Hang in there with them. Somebody hung in, with me when I was a pain in the, and you can do that too. It's just being a teenager, I think. Get more boys involved in sports. Sweating is good for young men. It's good for all of us, really. And it's a great way to learn about teamwork and the reality of winning and losing, of doing your best and putting in the effort and practicing, and then help them celebrate their success and their strength. Pull the screens out of their hands and take their fingers off the mouse. Encourage engagement with life outside the house or the basement. Expect them to volunteer to learn about their responsibility to the community. Mr. Galloway in particular talks about how important it is for young men to learn that your tribe needs you. There's a purpose and point in your life because you're needed beyond just being yourself or in your family. Get them into a small job that helps prepare them for a bigger job. Help them realize that the community really needs them and wants them. Galloway, the author, has stated that if we want better men, we have to be willing to put in the effort to create better men by helping our boys learn about mature masculinity, feeling a sense of purpose, of need for them to be here, accountability to a community, and a plan to move forward toward the future with some degree of confidence and the skills to handle real life and its challenges. We have to provide them with more guidance to become the protectors and the providers and the procreators in a responsible, healthy male way, because we need people who are mature and responsible in those ways. And we need to make our kids know that they're wanted and needed in their families and their communities. With mentors, they can learn about their talents and skills and things they may not have even known were there. We need to help them understand that there is life outside of those socially reinforced models of acquisition and large sums of money, working long hours or accumulating titles and awards for putting in relentless hard work. We need to help them learn about the value of internal satisfaction and personal validation, reinforced by the love and respect of their family and their friends. We need to help them see that there are many ways to be a real man, and that all of them have value. And we want them to know about beauty and nature and animals and plants so that they have a sense of how interconnected they are, not only with people, but with all of life. So despite what we may see out there in the world, those current efforts, especially on the political front in the nation south of us, that seem to want to return us to an earlier age. Ultimately, we are moving toward the future, not a return to some idolized version of the 1950s. Now, I know many of us will not live to see that world, but we have an obligation and a mandate to help prepare our young people, both boys and girls, however they identify, to be able to fully participate in the world that they will create and they will inhabit. So may it be.